Welcome, everyone. You made it through the rain. So here did our key guest of the moment. Landing in the wrong airport that you potentially thought you were going to be in. You jet set it over to us, and we thank you for it. Just where were you jetting in from? What's the work you've just
I was coming in from New Orleans, Louisiana. Our company just signed a software contract with the city. We have digital twins of every building in New Orleans. And so we're helping the city's sustainability team figure out how to green all the buildings and reduce emissions, but also to think about what a community-led planning process for climate resiliency in New Orleans looks like.
They've had some issues over the decades, shall we say.
And always new issues. While we were down there, we learned that they're actually running out of drinking water. So the Federal Corps of Army Engineers just announced that the city's gonna run out of clean drinking water in a couple weeks, and so
oh my goodness.
There has to be a plan put in place to figure that out. So we'll be going back to see if we can help them out with that problem as well.
So how would BlocPower, that focuses on power and energy efficiency, be something that can also fix water?
So what BlocPower does in many ways, we're a platform that brings innovative, cutting edge or bleeding edge hardware into existing buildings and existing infrastructure projects. In this instance, there are some new technologies, some awesome startups that actually use solar photovoltaic to power capturing air and converting it to drinking water. And so if you look at a Flint, Michigan, or a Jackson, Mississippi, or a New Orleans, Louisiana, you can actually drop some of these pieces of hardware into these environments and produce clean drinking water through renewable energy. And so we source that from our startup partners and finance it and send it to the city.
So you're spending more time on domestic flights in and around America at the moment because you made your impact here by being born here in Brooklyn, the business ramping up in more, they're not poverty-stricken, but more areas.
Underserved,
underserved communities. And now suddenly you're doing that, US-wide?
There's underserved communities all over the country. There's a lot of affluence, there's a lot of middle-class communities as well. But we think there's a unique opportunity in financially underserved communities. It turns out that, it's really the big affluent buildings where people have skyscrapers and big windows and indoor heated swimming pools, burn up a ton of energy per square foot, but also low-income buildings that are old and leaky and inefficient. They're neglected. The folks who live there can't afford to do sustainability upgrades or basic maintenance. You may have multiple families crammed into one apartment unit. You may have people who are unemployed and at home during the day using energy. And so wealthy buildings and low-income buildings burn the most fossil fuels per square foot. And there's a lot of people competing to serve wealthy buildings and provide them with sustainability products and services. We figured as a new startup, our niche was going to be to focus on the financially underserved communities. So we did that in Brooklyn. Over a few years, we greened about 670 apartment buildings across Brooklyn. And we did that in 24 months.
What triggered the idea?
To start the company?
Yeah, why were you like, okay, here's a wide open space that they are underserving the underserved?
Well, one, I come from these communities, and I come from neglected buildings in Bed-Stuy, where I grew up in Brooklyn, where Biggie Smalls' favorite rapper is from. We had a neglected heating system. It never worked, our hot water system and our heating system, and so we heat our apartment with the gas oven. And my parents worked nights, and so I was taught to light a match, light the oven, open up the oven door, and don't forget to open up a window so the carbon monoxide from the oven doesn't suffocate you at night.
At the same time.
Right. And so as I got older and became a climate advocate and a community organizer, I remember walking around Brooklyn in Brownsville, Brooklyn, where Mike Tyson is from, and it was 22 degrees outside, but all of the windows on the giant apartment complexes were open, just like my window was open growing up. And it turns out that we overheat thousands and thousands of buildings across New York City every winter, and so we're burning fossil fuels, we're paying for those fossil fuels, and the energy is just floating out the window. So the thought was, in Brownsville, Brooklyn, poorest neighborhood in New York City, why don't we train and hire the young people there to green the buildings so that we don't have to waste money burning fossil fuels and polluting the planet. And so we've spent the last 10 years trying to figure out how to do that.
So it's sort of building your supply chain, bringing in the talent, fixing a key issue there, but then also fixing the ultimate climate goals and indeed efficiency, easier and more cost effective. You were in politics when Obama was coming to the fore. You were fighting on that crusade. Was that when you suddenly realized, capitalism can also be an answer to this? I can imagine you were tempted with public service.
Yeah, I used to be like a little democratic socialist, like so many people in their 20s are. Once we won the presidency during the Obama campaign, they asked me what kind of job I thought I wanted to do. And they ended up assigning me to the green buildings component of the 2009 stimulus. And so the Recovery Act in 2009 was, post-financial crisis, subprime mortgage crisis. They were going to invest several $1 billion in greening buildings and training up a workforce to green those buildings. A lot of things went well with that project. Some didn't. We had about $90 billion of pension funds on the sidelines that wanted to co-invest with $6 billion of government money to create a freestanding green buildings industry in America, but we couldn't get it to work. And so I went to business school after a few years because I thought it was really important that we figure out how to get the green buildings industry in America to work. And so after 2 years working on that job, I quit to enroll at Columbia Business School.
Came out with the MBA, realized how perhaps your talents could be put to work, not only by campaigning, convincing, selling a vision. Did that help you in your private world of then raising money, selling a vision, what BlocPower is about, how to raise capital?
I was really surprised to see how many skills from political organizing on the Obama campaign or community organizing in the work that I was doing in Brooklyn applied to being a founder. Management skills, setting a vision, organizing resources and people and talent towards a common vision, navigating obstacles. Those are all core skills that we develop as community organizers and on the Obama campaign and politics. And I think it was super helpful for me as I became a founder.
Can you talk about some of the challenges more recently? There was an amazing article written about you sort of holed up in an aeroplane. Again, you spend a few time. For a climate advocate, unfortunately, you have to get around in an aeroplane.
Do.
Trying to use dodgy Wi-Fi because it was, I'm assuming around March the 10th, when Silicon Valley Bank was busy collapsing. You just announced on March the 1st, 150 million. Debt financing, equity financing. I mean, take us back to how your resourcefulness on the campaign trail figured into that particular obstacle on March 10th.
What a nightmare. Do you guys remember that? It feels like it was like
6 years ago, not 6 months.
It feels so long ago, but it was like a couple months ago. So I had flown to Paris for an artificial intelligence conference.
Something we can dig
AI.
into in a minute.
We can dig into AI and how it's relevant to climate infrastructure. And so I wanted to go learn from some of the best AI practitioners in the world about how we could apply the emerging technology. And while I was in Paris, I was totally jet lagged. So I passed out. And then my phone kept beeping, and I woke up to 300 emails on the Andreessen Horowitz tech founder listserv. And I think the email was kind of like, what are you guys doing about SVB? ? And then there's hundreds of emails. I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? So I'm in Paris trying to figure out, what we can do. But I had an early flight, and it was on that transit, the flight across the ocean that we realized we were going to have to pull all of our money out of SVB and First Republic. We had tens of millions of dollars from
that we just raised,
and it was all there. It was 10 years of work that was in the bank, and so we realized that we were going to have to withdraw all of our funding from SVB and First Republic because we thought that First Republic would soon follow.
That's quite far-sighted of you, because at that time, I had many a founder and VC being like, "Phew, we're in First Republic, it's okay," but the dominoes.
No, we didn't think so. And so,
well done.
The challenge was, in order to withdraw the money, First Republic needed to talk to me on the phone to authorize the wire transfer.
You were the single point of failure.
I was a single point of failure, and I was on this flight with dodgy Wi-Fi, and so I locked myself in the bathroom. And got on the Wi-Fi, and First Republic called me to authorize, and they said, do you authorize this wire? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, we can't hear you. Do you authorize this wire? I'm like, yes! And I'd locked myself in the bathroom for like 20 minutes. So there's this like line outside the bathroom door on the plane. People are trying to get in, and then they hear me screaming, yes, yes.
Like, is he gaming? And who's in there with him?
I guess they thought I was constipated.
He's having a
That's
great
fine.
flight.
I had to do what I had to do to get that wire out. And fortunately, we were able to get the wire out. And fortunately, the Biden-Harris administration recognized how important SVB and First Republic were and made arrangements to secure those facilities. Really, really important, but totally scary, totally terrifying.
How did your network help at that moment? Was it other founders that you'd been building alongside that were helpful? Was it the VCs? Because Andreessen and Horowitz, of course, put in money to you. So had Goldman, had really organized some of the debt side of the equation. Who was there supporting you?
It was helpful that we were able to reach out to investors, but really it was the network of founders. It was the other CEOs who were saying, guys, what are you guys hearing? What are you seeing? What are you doing? Are you pulling your money out? And so, you could say that those conversations also facilitated a bank run.
Yes,
you could say that.
Well said. Yeah.
But as a founder, your first obligation is to your company and to your team and to your customers. And so we took the steps that were needed. But that was an instance where the network of founders was super critical. And I think for folks looking to break into tech as founders, I didn't understand how important the network of founders is. It is even more important than your network of VCs. And in fact, your network of VCs emerges from your network of founders.
Really? Because they make the soft.
VCs have already vetted and underwritten these founders and invested millions of dollars. And they email them and say, hey, do you know this founder? Have you talked to them? Have you had lunch with them? What's your sense? And they trust their founder's sense. And so your network of other CEO founders is one of the most important things you can invest time in. And I actually have started, scheduling a series of time monthly where I just meet with other CEO founders.
So you're in Bed-Stuy. You're growing up in one of the poorest areas, listening to rap, walking on the same streets as Tyson, and then thinking, you must have learned to build a network at that point because you got yourself to Duke. You then in Columbia, and I'm pretty sure you had a whole network of family supporting, holding you up. But you must have known how to make a network quite early.
Well, like so many immigrant families, lots and lots of folks sacrifice and to make sure that their children or even younger cousins, right, get opportunities. And that's the story of America, is families sacrificing for their kids to have a better life. We have a giant migrant crisis here in New York City. I actually think it's a climate migrant crisis. People aren't talking about that enough, that there's like tremendous droughts in these regions that have destabilized the economies and have started to cause migration. If you talk to Vice President Al Gore, he's very explicit about, hey, a lot of these folks are climate migrants. This is the beginning of mass dislocation that comes because of volatile climates and the kind of changes in population locations that are going to occur because of climate. And so as a climate advocate and a climate tech founder, what kind of responsibilities or obligations or thinking can we do about the climate crisis here in New York City? But that's a whole other ball of wax.
But the ball of wax we were asking about was the networking effect. How have you, let's look at this new ball of wax. Let's look at, you feel that it's your responsibility now within climate tech here in New York City, no matter which city is currently being affected by this, to try and help solve. You're already solving one key issue, which is, underserved communities. You're helping train those from underserved communities. How now can you think within your network about solving for climate that is happening abroad?
Look, I think your last two questions in some ways are integrated, right? Like, I 100% believe that the solutions to the climate crisis are inextricably woven with solutions to wealth inequality. And so as people pursue and achieve more economic opportunity, I believe that the talent that is unlocked among larger and larger groups of the human population gives us as a group of humans the most brilliant minds available across all human beings to apply to the climate crisis. And so just like the solutions that BlocPower is built around come from the experience of a poor first generation, kid growing up in a low-income slum in Brooklyn with no heating system. And now we are rolling out to 25 to 30 cities and figuring out how to replace heating systems and address 30% of US greenhouse gas emissions as best we can, which is the size of the problem. The lived experience of different kinds of Americans and different kinds of people around the world are really important to developing the broad range of solutions that we must apply to the climate crisis. Now, it was a long journey getting from Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn to Duke and to Columbia and to the Obama campaign and here on the stage with you. And there's lots of challenges and really difficult conversations and lessons that I've had to learn that it is in my self-interest to share with other founders, to share with women, to share with minority, Black and brown founders who only get 3% of venture capital. What are the lessons that are learned that I can share in terms of best practices with founders who are coming behind me so that they can shortcut a lot of the mistakes that I made? And one of those is what we just talked about. You got to network with other CEOs and founders. Like that's a critical piece of the ballgame.
What's
for example.
The second one?
I think that you need to raise capital inside the culture of the institution that you're raising capital from.
Okay, delve into that a little bit.
Okay, so you need to, there's a couple levels to this. So it's not as simple as, hey, VCs wear Patagonia vests, and so you should wear a Patagonia vest, although that's helpful. Like I'm from Brooklyn, we wear North Face. It actually kind of matters a little bit.
Thanks for wearing a gilet today.
But that's kind of thin. At a deeper level, when you're thinking about raising capital, I spent about 4 years before I learned probably the most important lesson. If a VC emails you and says, hey, come by my office and tell me about your company, or send me your pitch deck over email, and you actually send them your pitch deck over email, or you actually go over to their office and have coffee with them, you're already behind. You've missed the opportunity to demonstrate that you understand how the Silicon Valley fundraising game is played, or Silicon Alley, by saying, I'm really busy. I'm too busy to come to your office. Obviously, I'm not going to send over a PowerPoint presentation over email.
So you can just share it with everyone.
So you can share it with everyone, and who cares what's on my PowerPoint? You need to evaluate me as a founder. Like, ideas are a dime a dozen. Can I convert this PowerPoint idea into a company? And how can you possibly evaluate that from an emailed pitch deck? So you actually need to signal to the VCs that you understand the game that they're playing. And if you do not do that, you're making it 3, 4, 5 times as hard to raise capital. And so...
It's almost a test that they're giving you.
Yeah. It literally is a test.
That's really sad.
It is pathetic, but that is how capital is raised in Silicon Valley and Silicon Alley. And if you don't learn those cues, if there's no one to teach you those cues or those lessons, then you're going to have a challenging time raising capital.
You raised capital in 2020.
Yes.
You then raised capital in 2023. These are quite difficult years for raising capital.
I always pick the worst times: pandemics, recessions.
And then 2021, there was this moment of realization, of self-reflection that had to come, sadly, from the death of an individual. And I'm obviously talking about George Floyd. And then we all started wringing our hands. We were aware of the devastation that was brought to us.
Yeah.
And to our attention, at least, that was quite clear within the VC community, in the startup community, in these, inside clubs. But then suddenly people were like, oh, I'm committing capital to this. I've got like a diverse fund. I'm putting a chunk of change. Did things get better? Do you think things in 2023, despite the fact that the economy was starting to tank, were easier than they had been in 2020?
It is easier to get a first meeting with a venture capitalist if you're a woman or a person of color than it was 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay.
You will get that first meeting and it will be easier. Is it easier to actually get a check and build a 5 to 10 year business partnership with an investor than it was before? Not so much, right? But there's more opportunities because folks are more open. I think what really is going to have to happen is a bunch of us are going to have to IPO. Yep. Take the proceeds from those IPOs and reinvest it in founders who come from where we come from and are building
build your own culture.
that's how it works.
It's not how it should work.
It's not how it should work, but it is how it works. And I think, as a founder, I had to really think about my obligations. And as a founder who's a former community organizer, I was horrified by George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and all the things that happened that summer. I mean, it was so traumatizing. I still haven't watched some of the videos, right? They're horrible. What role did I have as a CEO of a startup that was rapidly running out of money that I thought would die by the end of 2020? Like, what obligations did I have? And I talked to one of our first investors, Mitch Kapoor. Mitch did Lotus, so he was apparently the original like Zuckerberg high growth startup, $50 million in year one in like 1980 something. And he was one of our first investors. So we'd fled from Brooklyn. We'd moved to a farm in upstate New York to run away from the pandemic because we had a 3-year-old. And we didn't have Wi-Fi and we didn't have telephones. And Mitch finally found me and got my number from someplace and called me. And he goes, whatever happens, the company may die, but you've got to go out like you came in. You've got to find a way to help people. You got to figure it out. So whether or not the company survives or thrives or dies, like, you need to remain focused on, there's a global pandemic, people are dying left and right. What are the ways that you can be of service? Are there ways that you can be of service? And so at that time, we pivoted our entire business to figuring out how to close the digital divide.
Really?
When we install clean energy hardware in buildings, Goldman needs to see the Internet of Things data from those clean energy devices. Goldman lends us the money, we buy the devices, we install them. Goldman wants to see that they're performing. In many low-income communities, there obviously isn't internet. And so we've had to get very good at rigging together internet and data streams in low-income communities in order to collect data on our clean energy investments that we make. And so we realized that we could expand that to kids who were at home, or folks who needed to work remotely but didn't have internet. And so we connected a bunch of buildings in the Bronx. I think there was like 10,000 people that were using our internet system a day that we jerry-rigged in one of New York City's poorest neighborhoods. And out of that work of service, some of our VCs called us and said that they wanted to offer us a term sheet to do our Series A. So our company survived, and we'd live to fight another day to raise capital in the next recession or downturn. So, yeah.
It works for you, clearly. And what an inspiring piece of advice to have come from an early believer. And I think, let's talk now about where all the oxygen is being sucked out of the room, is AI. Is AI a solve? And so how are you applying this new technology that everyone's desperate to write some sort of check to? A lot of companies are suddenly becoming AI adjacent or AI, but it seems like you were already on the case in March.
So this is a great question, really important. So we bought and assembled a data set of every building in America. So we built digital models of all 125 million buildings in America. And then we ran those models through a thermodynamic energy program that is open source from the Department of Energy that allows us to predict the amount of fossil fuel waste and fossil fuel savings that could be generated by upgrading individual buildings to clean energy. And so Jeff Bezos and Lauren, his partner, actually donated $4 or $5 million of Amazon stock for us to build out this platform. And so we have this giant data set of all the buildings in America and can start to predict how to make them green and what the financial returns would be and what the air pollution reductions would be and what the energy bill reductions might be. And so we have built AI models on top of that large data set that do pattern recognition, anomaly detection. We look at satellite data to identify different pieces of equipment on the roof or walls of a building. There's all sorts of applications, but fundamentally we're exploring building a new language model that will allow non-technical, non-mechanical engineering folks like myself to use prompts and get natural language modeled responses from an AI application that is equivalent or better than the best mechanical engineer in the world. So how do you train AI to be the best sustainability engineer in the world, and can you build a model that does that? And that's what we're focused on with our data set.
Wow. Well, at this moment, I want to ask the audience to galvanize themselves, to start asking some questions, because I've got a billion, but I also want to share this moment with you. My first question from that, and start putting up your hands if you do have a question, is how did you get the meeting with Jeff Bezos to get the 5 million and Lauren? Or was that, again...
How did we get the meeting with Bezos and Lauren? Because it's interesting, Lauren is a really important part of his strategy. Jeff Bezos is now the largest climate philanthropist in the world. He's committed, I want to say $10 billion philanthropic investments and grants to solving the climate crisis. And Lauren, his partner, from what I can tell, is a key part of that strategy. Every time I've been in meetings with him, she's been there and really creates a lot of value and has a strategic vision for how things should roll out. In incorporating financially underserved people into the workforce, into AI. We have a good working relationship with Amazon and Amazon Web Services. And through some of those relationships, we got on the radar of Amazon and AWS as an entity. We published a bunch of white papers together, and I believe it caught the eye of some of Mr. Bezos' advisors on his climate investment, and so we were introduced.
You did the work.
I was totally intimidated.
Wait, and how does that manifest?
I was mute because I was totally terrified of him, but he and Lauren were really lovely. He told this really great story as like one of the most powerful men in the world. His youngest daughter is really disciplined. She's like a stickler for time. And he told this great story about how he was supposed to go to breakfast with her at 8 a.m. and he got down to the kitchen to meet her at 8:03 and she'd like driven off and left him. And so he's like running down the street after the car to like catch her at the stop sign, and she like totally left him. So I think it was really nice to see the other side, the personal side of Mr. Bezos and his incredible family. So that's a privilege. But the reality is, look, like the thinking about how to use AI to address the climate crisis. He was our first investor in that thesis, and we're really proud of the opportunity he gave us, and we intend to follow through. We intend to use these AI models that we've been building to translate to real world emissions. Yes. AI for the sake of AI is like not enough, and it's a little scary. But AI used to optimize and speed up the rate at which we can bring down emissions in old leaky buildings. That's what we're focused on, and Mr. Bezos gave us that shot.
And that's when, unfortunately, we're still confronted when you're driving around New York City with a migrant issue. You can look at yourself in the mirror at the end of the day and go, I'm actually doing something.
Contribute.
That I can solve to it. Is there a question in the house? We've only got not that much time left. So yeah, if you're eager, please put up your hands. There's a gentleman here. If we go first and then the lady.
I'm Anthony. I work at Bloomberg. I'm actually very proud to see you here because I'm Guyanese. My question is, you use a lot of tech and you're also using AI to solve these climate problems. But tech and AI also, in and of itself, produces some of these global emissions. Have you considered maybe how that might contribute to climate change? And have you thought about maybe how you might solve or maybe help reduce how much your company might emit or add to those emissions using technology?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Fine, I'll answer your question because you're Guyanese. I won't evade your difficult question. One of our biggest investors and most important investors is Microsoft. And Microsoft is clearly very focused on AI as a core strategy. They're investing billions and billions and billions of dollars in it, and they're doing great at it. They got to buy a bunch of data centers, right, to keep up with that strategy. So how does Microsoft think about this? Well, they emailed us and said, hey, we're opening a bunch of data centers in Atlanta and in Georgia. What we want to do is to figure out almost like a carbon offset program. They wouldn't use that language. They would recoil because they don't do offsets. But basically, it's almost like a Tom Shoe model, right? They're going to build their data centers. They want the data centers to use 100% renewable energy, but they want that renewable energy to come from buildings and communities that are financially underserved in Atlanta. So they're willing to invest Microsoft resources. They've invested about $35 million in us, and we use that capital to install solar, electric vehicle charging stations, backup battery charging stations, in low-income apartment buildings in Atlanta. So we're just getting started on this program. But the idea is, yes, they're going to build their new data centers, but how can you use the construction and the power that flows into those data centers to also build clean energy infrastructure in places where that infrastructure would otherwise not get built? And we're very proud of our partnership with Microsoft because we think that they're doing some of the best thinking in the world on this particular issue, and we hope that the other big tech companies will follow suit.
Great answer.
Fair enough? Love it. Okay. I didn't come up with it, it's Microsoft.
We have two, one here and one, should we go over to this one?
I can just say it out loud. Oh, okay. Thank you. Mike, it doesn't matter where I'm from, but you talk, a good part of your business is working with governments, municipalities, I guess the policy departments, whatever. But when you talk about fundraising, it sounds like you're talking to the venture funds, you're talking to grants, and maybe the philanthropic. So is a lot of this driven by social responsibility arms of like Microsoft, or is it their pure venture funds and they just see a side business? So I guess.
Well, our biggest investor is Goldman Sachs, and I love them. I love the people that we work with at Goldman. However, I don't think that most of us would say that Goldman is primarily a social responsibility organization. They invest, and we give them market rate returns. We don't, it's gonna take several $1 trillion to green all the buildings in America. It's 125 million buildings. It's 30% of emissions. It's gonna cost like $4 to $6 trillion, depending on who's doing the calculations. There is no amount of grant money in the world that's going to get us to the trillions of dollars that we need to green the buildings. And I have children. We must green the buildings, right? Yes, we have to do the cars. We must green the buildings. So where does the capital come from? It's not going to come from foundations. It has to come from Wall Street. It's not going to come from Silicon Valley either, by the way. And so our biggest investor is Goldman. We're really proud of that. We give them market rate returns, and sometimes above market rate returns, in investments that don't correlate with the market. So it's a smart business strategy on their part. And Goldman, as you know, every generation has to reinvent itself. They're doing that. A lot of wealth is being transferred from ultra high net worth individuals to millennials and to Gen Z.
They care.
Gen Z is going to, for sure, want to invest their capital in products and services that are addressing the climate crisis. So if you're an investment bank and you don't have a strategy for the climate crisis, that is bad business, right? And so that's our approach.
Despite the politicization that keeps occurring, particularly in America.
The politicization is interesting. I'm glad you brought it up. I do think that climate technology CEOs and investors need to do more to be vocal about the business benefits of ESG. It's business. It's great corporate governance. I had the chance to have lunch with Robert Smith. He talked about ESG to me, and he said it's risk management.
Yeah.
It's nothing but risk management, right? He's in private equity, not in VC. He can't have 9 companies out of 10 go bust and have one work out. He needs all 10 companies to do well because he's in private equity. How do you do risk management across 10 companies? Well, if you have good governance in all 10 companies, then you're likely to have better financial performance from all 10 companies, right? So we got to do a better job on our side of the table of defending ESG and showing outsized financial performance.
Well said. It can't be impact, it's actually
Can't be
profit.
impact.
It's making a
Can't
profit.
be impact.
And that last one at the back there.
Thank you. Cornell alum, very interested in the alternative energy space. So as a follow-up to that question, and as I think about the IRA and the Biden Infrastructure Act, when I think about just that, the revenue demand, when are we going to shift from subsidies to consumer or even business demand as opposed to a risk management approach, which is sort of just making sure you're in the space from a, as you say, a risk management space. And not only with BlocPower, but with the whole alternative energy space.
Yeah, there's a lot of tough questions from this audience. I don't know if you guys are like plants or like what.
I'm just throwing in for the easy ones, and then we really get to the good stuff.
Fine, I'll answer your question. I think, what's the best way to talk about this? Look, one, when the IRA passed, I woke my kids up, kissed them on the forehead, and said to myself, now we got a shot. Now we got a chance to make sure that when my kids are my age, when they're 40, that they're not going to be hunting rats in the desert. So that's one. I'm pro-IRA. I'm pro-Inflation Reduction Act, and I think that the president and Senator Schumer getting this thing passed is just one of the most massive accomplishments in human history. No question. That's where I'm at. Now, in terms of the structure of the IRA and the mix of credits, grants, incentives, whatever, to invest in creating markets and American innovation that's based here in America, I will point you back to my former boss, President Obama, who during his first term loaned $500 million to, at the time, what was a very risky company, Tesla. That loan was repaid. Tesla's gone on to do remarkable things. The IRA is no different. The government does have a role to play in providing flexible, risk-tolerant capital to hardware and software innovations and business models that VC and early-stage capital cannot finance. It may be that the solutions to the climate crisis don't produce the kinds of 10x outcomes on the time frame that largely software-based VCs need. So who will be the early stage investor to anchor these early stage investments, if not the government? Private equity can't do it, VC can't do it. So there's this market gap, and I thank God that the federal government is there to try and fill that role. Now, are there ways to structure those investments in ways that make sense? Absolutely. But I do think, going back to Tesla, the markets did not want to provide capital to Tesla. President Obama and the US Department of Energy did. They provided capital to the solar industry as well as electric vehicle industries. They bailed out, Detroit and General Motors, and I think there's been outsized financial performance from those firms, right? And so I hope and expect that the Inflation Reduction Act will follow suit. I think it's going to lead to a remarkable economic recovery, and we as Americans have to, what's up?
Is there a time frame? You talked about Tesla, right? Tesla's been actually been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they just profitable sporadically in the last 3 years. So extrapolate that to the alternative energy industry. That's kind of where.
Sure, there has to be enough capital to get to economies of scale, to where you can buy the factories and buy the robots and build the software that's going to allow you to lower prices, to experiment with new business models, to make those business models more and more efficient. You have to get to an economy of scale so you can lower the unit economics of hardware and in some instances software and
Maybe you can compare and contrast US and Europe. In the US, there's very much a carrot sort of incentive scheme going on. In Europe, there's perhaps more of a stick of his, and by 2030, there is no other option.
That's right.
But
That's right.
capitalism will probably get us there no matter what.
And wherever the winners emerge, both Europe and America and the rest of the world are going to follow suit. And so we have to create a portfolio of clean energy options across the globe that can save the planet, and that's what we're doing. And I think if you talk to people in Europe, they're thrilled about the IRA as well.
Yeah, it's going to help them as well.
That's right. That's right.
I think on that note, we're getting red lights flashing at us, but if you've got other questions, do ask. Of course, we're going to get our mics off, go and all mingle for a little bit, but we really appreciate your time here today. I'm sorry that we couldn't take more questions, but please do put them forth to Donnel. But on that note, Donnel Baird.
Thank you for your
What a
great
joy.
questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and your great questions. Thank you, Tech NYC, and of course, Cornell for having us.